I hadn't set foot in that office since my grandfather started having serious health problems. And even now, the only reason I was here was because he had insisted I give him my word. The conference room carried the aroma of lemon oil and aged paperwork, a scent that seemed woven into the wooden furniture and hidden stories. My mother, Eleanor Bexley, fiddled with her pearl necklace, her nails immaculate as always. My father sat rigid and defensive, arms folded as if he were preparing for a fight. And Isolde Bexley, ever the picture of composure, wore an immaculate cream blouse untouched by sorrow and a half-smirk that suggested she believed the outcome was already in her favor. Sanford Keene, my grandfather's attorney for more than 30 years, cleared his throat and opened his file with measured, deliberate care. "We are here to carry out the last wishes of Luther Callahan," he began. His tone remained steady, even as he looked straight at me before he began to recite the bequests. "To my sister, Isolde Bexley," he started, "the cabin in Jackson Hole and the vintage 1959 Gibson guitar." Isolde blinked, evidently anticipating something further. "For Warren and Coraline," he continued, "there was the grandfather clock that had been in our family, select vinyl albums, and a charitable donation of $8,000 made in their honor." Eleanor let out a sound somewhere between a scoff and a retch. "That has to be a mistake." Sanford didn't so much as blink. He flipped to the following page, addressed to me, his granddaughter, and his confidant. He bequeaths his full financial estate amounting to $31,180,000. Total silence followed. "And now?" my father demanded. My sister showed a slight clench of her jaw. My mother pushed herself to her feet, cheeks turning red. She turned her back on us. "She is unworthy," Mr. Sanford Keene proceeded in the same level tone, his eyes still on the documents. "This will was executed, notarized, and filed by Grandpa Luther Callahan himself 5 months prior to his death." They ignored the rest of his statement. My father surged forward over the table, grabbed the check that Mr. Sanford Keene had just given me, and waved it in the air as if it were a fake. "Do you really believe this is enough to earn your way back?" Before I could say anything, he struck a match. The flames licked along the edge of the check, curling it as it charred. My mother, Eleanor, tore the envelope from my grasp, ripping it to pieces until my grandfather Luther Callahan's handwriting was nothing but scraps. "This is what happens when you turn your back on your family," she spat. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't plead. All I did was grin, a grin that never touched my eyes but kept me upright. The truth was, what they destroyed wasn't what they believed it to be. What they missed entirely was the envelope still hidden in my coat pocket. The final meaningful conversation I ever had with my father, Franklin, ended with him warning, "If you step out that door, don't bother coming back." I was 14. I had just rejected a full scholarship to my grandfather's old university's business school, choosing instead to attend a tiny liberal arts college upstate to pursue visual design. He dismissed it as nothing more than a pastime filled with illusions. Eleanor Bexley didn't object. She simply stood behind Franklin, her mouth so firmly shut, it almost vanished. 4 weeks later, I returned home for Labor Day and discovered my bedroom completely emptied. The desk, the mattress, even the case of books with the notes my grandfather once tucked into the pages, all of it was gone. In their place sat 2 slate armchairs, an artificial orchid, and a picture of a lighthouse I had no memory of ever seeing. The nameplate had been switched from my name to Guest Suite B. My sister, Isolde Bexley, encountered me in the corridor and snickered. I was overreacting. It wasn't as if I actually needed it. My separation from them wasn't immediate. At first, it was small omissions, skipped birthday greetings or ignored phone messages. Eventually, even the rental payment from my parents, Franklin and Eleanor Bexley, failed to arrive. When I phoned to question my mother about it, she only responded, Choices matter, Vera. You asked for self-reliance. So, you have it. I would have lost the apartment if my grandfather, Luther Callahan, hadn't intervened. He sent the precise sum 5 days later, asking nothing in return. From then onward, the funds showed up with steady subtlety. Never excessive, always modest, but just enough to cover the bills and keep my apartment warm. Along with the money came notes written in his frail yet graceful handwriting. He never blamed me for moving away. He didn't ask me to return home. Yet each message carried something more powerful than words. He truly understood me. The very last letter I ever received from him arrived 4 weeks before he died. The note simply read, "Survival isn't a fault. Rather, it's the earliest sign of courage." I slipped that letter into my wallet and kept it close through every failed job application, every lonely holiday, and each night I spent pretending to be indifferent. Even now, I still had it. As the remnants of the forged check cooled on the table before me, I reached into my jacket to touch the genuine envelope still hidden there. The moment I got back to my place, I made sure to lock the door and kick off my heels. My legs shook, not out of fear, but from the fatigue that had built up and couldn't be held back any longer. I draped my coat over a chair in the kitchen and took out the envelope my grandfather, Luther Callahan, had given me 6 weeks before he died. Grandpa Luther Callahan had passed it to me in a quiet booth at Cedar Grove Luncheonette, wrapped in a cloth napkin as if he were entrusting me with something sacred. "Don't open it," he had warned, "unless they destroy it." And indeed they had. I peeled away the wax seal and gently unfolded its contents. Inside was a single check, nearly identical to the one that had burned right in front of me earlier that day. It bore the same amount and signature, but this particular check was stamped with small crimson letters. Non-negotiable copy. My hands were steady. When I flipped the check, I saw a tiny USB drive attached to its back, along with a handwritten message in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. "Let them destroy it." Then I unlocked the actual file. After inserting the drive, I found there was no splash screen, no request for a password, just a folder labeled Inheritance, and inside it, a PDF of a trust transfer. The document was complete with signatures, witnesses, and had been processed by a company I didn't recall ever hearing about. At the end of the account number were digits I'd known by heart since childhood, my grandfather's birthday in reverse. There was nothing imaginary about the money. The account shift had already taken place some time before. The check they destroyed had only been a diversion, a lure. I reclined in my seat, the heavy stillness of my apartment embracing me. This wasn't about them any longer. It had ceased being their story some time ago. My grandfather hadn't merely relied on me. He had carefully anticipated each of their responses, mapping everything out in advance. Now it was up to me to strategize in the same way. The following morning, I attempted to view my balance at Heritage Federal, not just out of routine, but also in search of some comfort. The digital display flashed, hesitated, and then delivered an error notification. Account not found. I tried a different card, but it was rejected as well. Slowing my typing, as if perfect accuracy would resolve the issue, I refreshed the login and re-entered my credentials. Still, nothing happened. At first, I reassured myself that it must be a temporary hold, perhaps triggered by suspicious activity from the day before. Yet when I contacted Heritage Federal, the employee's tone carried an unmistakable uncertainty. "I'm sorry, Miss Bexley," he said, fingers clicking on unseen keys. "Our records list your account as inactive. Actually, it's listed as deceased." A wave of dryness swept over my mouth. That couldn't be right. He hesitated. He added that the designation was officially established by the registrar's office, with a date 2 weeks back. I ended the call before my voice could betray me. I got confirmation from the Motor Services office 40 minutes later. The lady sitting behind the glass divider glanced at her computer, frowned, and informed me, "Your record shows you are legally dead." The death certificate had been submitted using my full legal name, Vera Bexley. Though her words were delivered without emotion, I caught a look of sympathy in her eyes as she glanced at me. She explained that I would need to submit paperwork for a correction, warning that resolving it could take several months. I stayed quiet. I stepped out into the chill, feeling as if reality itself had curled up at the edges to prove that what I believed to be permanent could vanish in an instant. Across the road, a woman stood motionless, half concealed by a row of leafless trees. Her oversized sunglasses seemed out of place beneath the dull sky. Draped around her neck was a light blue silk scarf, just like the one my mother, Eleanor, had insisted the cleaners misplaced 5 years ago. She didn't offer a smile. She held my gaze without turning away. She was observing me. I merged with the steady stream of people on the sidewalk, letting my movements be purposeful rather than hurried. When I rounded the next block, she had already vanished. Once I returned to my apartment, I opened the drawer that held my old letters and arranged them in a trail, almost like clues. It wasn't only that I'd lost my inheritance, I was being methodically, silently erased. There was a sense that my erasure was being watched, as if someone was making sure it would be absolute. I powered up my laptop, retrieved the USB from its storage, and gazed at the folder my grandfather had named Inheritance. Somewhere within those files lay my next direction. The brass key had rested for years in my nightstand, still wrapped in the faded handkerchief my grandfather gave me on my 14th birthday. I never asked what it unlocked. He merely told me, "You'll require this when it's time to claim who you are." That moment had finally arrived. Barrowcroft Secure Vaults was located behind an unmarked door on the outskirts of the historic district, nestled between a small wine boutique and an old bookstore. The receptionist glanced at the key, briefly checked her log, and silently guided me down a hushed hallway. The temperature dropped noticeably as we continued, until we arrived at a narrow room lined with rows of metal storage units. "Box 14, she murmured, unlocking the compartment and pulling it open. I nodded, waiting for her to leave and close the door behind me before I reached into the drawer. Inside rested a sleek, cold black fireproof envelope. Carefully, I unfolded it. The top document turned out to be a certified cashier's check from Heritage Federal, the bank's seal pressed right into the page. $31,180,000 made out to me. After that, I found bulkier documents, land deeds properly notarized, granting me outright ownership of the family's entire real estate. Next came stock certificates for Bexley Hardwick Group, giving me all the voting rights and decision-making power. My name appeared at the top of each page, and below was a flash drive wrapped in velvet. Once I was back at my apartment, I plugged it into my laptop and double-clicked the only file it held. My grandfather's face appeared on the screen. He seemed older than I remembered, sitting in the sunroom with sunlight streaming over his shoulder. "If you're seeing this, Vera, then they have done what I most dreaded. They tried to wipe you out." He spoke with clear intent, each word slow and considered. I had always been the quiet observer, the one who noticed everything, felt deeply, yet never asked for anything. That's what made them uneasy. That's why he placed his faith in me. He leaned a little closer to the camera, his eyes weary and watchful. "What you hold isn't simply wealth. It's remembrance. It's what endures. And if anyone tries to destroy what's yours, this is your path back." The screen went dark. I knew precisely what my next destination was. I discovered an envelope affixed just below the peephole on my own front door. It was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no other writing except a neat line printed in block letters. The message read, "They never destroyed the actual check. Check the box array at Barrowcroft Security Holdings." There was no signature, no indication of the sender, and only a quiet stillness coming from beyond the door. I remained seated at my table for quite a while, simply gazing at the envelope, before eventually reaching for my laptop. Barrowcroft Security Holdings operated multiple vault facilities. The box array wasn't mentioned publicly, but I was familiar with the term. My grandfather, Luther Callahan, had once quipped that was where they kept the true skeletons. I accessed the estate email account that had been set up when the trust was transferred and noticed a message I hadn't seen before. The subject field was empty. There was only a single sentence in the body. They are not after the money. They wanted the signature. There was a single document attached, an unsigned form to transfer assets. At the top, Bexley Hardwick Group. Underneath, another form, but this one had been signed. I saw my name written, yet the signature didn't belong to me. They had faked it. Their plan was to sell the company. I logged into the company's internal dashboard that my grandfather, Luther Callahan, had arranged months earlier. It was all there. Deals, suggested changes, assets being moved. Each decision authorized as though it were me, even though I was legally considered dead. Not only was I disinherited, but I had been turned into a technicality, my absence conveniently erased. They believed they had stripped me of everything, but they left behind a messy and overconfident trail. That kind of arrogance assumed someone like me would never come back. I grabbed my grandfather's flash drive one more time and navigated to a folder titled Savannah Land Archives. Every parcel had my name beside it, and at that moment, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. The name listed on the lease was O.S. Gannon, an alias that my grandfather, Luther Callahan, once used for securing fishing permits and bidding in old record auctions. It was all an inside joke between us. He told me, "You're like the wildflower that manages to thrive in the wrong place, Vera." That memory resurfaced as I drove beyond the edges of the city, weaving through rust-eaten fields and abandoned properties, until I finally parked beside a low stretch of storage units and found number 21A waiting for me. Using the tiny brass key I'd kept in a velvet pouch, I turned the lock and slipped the door open. The air was musty, but I could tell someone had been there before me. Against the far wall stood a lone metal shelving unit, and right in the middle, as if deliberately left for me to discover, rested a black fireproof briefcase with a manila envelope inside, containing my original birth certificate, not the amended one with my stepfather's last name. This birth certificate bore only my name, Vera Bexley. No hyphens, no changes. After that came the stack of letters, 14 in total. Everyone was written in my grandfather's distinct handwriting. Many of them were marked just weeks apart from important moments in our family's life, such as my college commencement, my parents, Franklin and Eleanor Bexley, vow renewal, and the Christmas I spent by myself. Grandpa Luther Callahan had penned them, yet never actually sent them. One phrase recurred frequently: "They won't erase you. Not while I'm still standing." Tucked below the letters was a notarized will with a date following the one listed as the day I supposedly died. His signature was bold and purposeful. In it, I was named the only heir. Neither my sister, nor my uncle, nor my aunt were mentioned. Just me. But what truly left me breathless was the property deed. Bexley Estate, Savannah, GA. The official owner, Vera Coraline Bexley. My hand skimmed the raised seal. I realized this was more than inheriting a home. I now held the root of their control, the very soil it rested on. And they had no idea. Lowering myself onto a battered plastic chair by the entrance, I pressed the folder to my chest, finally registering the strange weight of seeing my own name written inside. Years had passed. I wasn't a shadow. They had no idea I was already making my way back inside the entrance they believed they had barred. Irene Warfield was mostly silent as I passed her the briefcase. She simply flipped it open, quickly reviewed the papers with her incisive gaze, and stated, We'll act quickly." She expressed no surprise, only a calm assurance, as though she'd witnessed so many acts of familial deceit that a dangerous document trail was nothing new. We lodged the objection in less than 36 hours. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday. The Municipal Justice Center carried the scent of polished floors and bygone judgments. I chose black for my outfit, not to grieve, but because sometimes armor makes no noise. My mother, Eleanor Bexley, and my father, Franklin Bexley, arrived together, accompanied by a young attorney whose suit was too snug and whose smirk was far too relaxed. My sister drifted in behind them, lips shining with gloss, and her phone glued to her palm. None of them met my eyes. Judge Mordecai Webb sat on the bench, known for his terse remarks and a deep impatience for dramatics. When it was our turn, the judge gestured towards Irene Warfield. I watched as she remained poised and purposeful, her voice steady as she said, "We have gathered here to dispute the administration of the estate of my grandfather, Luther Callahan, outlining allegations of fraud, duress, and identity concealment." The other attorney gave a dismissive sigh and said, "Your Honor, my clients are named recipients. Any modifications to the will after death are baseless and simply emotional responses." Irene raised her device and addressed Judge Mordecai Webb, explaining that the deceased had foreseen this challenge. One tap and the courtroom's lights faded, while a display illuminated the wall behind the judge's seat. The face of my grandfather, Luther Callahan, filled the screen. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means they tried to erase her." His tone was unwavering and measured. "Let the official record state that I altered my will of my own volition, with no coercion. I appointed myself as sole heir due to my merit and perseverance." Instantly a hush spread across the room. Isolde Bexley seemed about to object, but fell silent. My mother, Eleanor Bexley, gasped. My father, Franklin Bexley, shifted in his seat as if preparing to speak, but Judge Mordecai Webb held up a hand to stop him. That was enough. Judge Webb turned towards the others, his tone icy. "You weren't merely attempting to sway this Municipal Justice Center. You tried to erase someone's existence." After that, he directed his gaze at me. "The Municipal Justice Center acknowledges me, Vera Bexley, as the sole lawful beneficiary of Luther Callahan's estate. The respondent's assets shall be placed on hold while the investigation continues." I let out a breath, not out of comfort, but out of letting go. The harm was already done. Now it was time for the consequences. My sister messaged me twice before I finally replied. The first text was brief. "Just the word, please." The second message was lengthier and more awkward. "Can we please talk? Just between us. Like it used to be." I consented to meet her at a cafe by the Municipal Justice Center. It was neutral territory, a place without baggage. My sister was seated before I arrived, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't taken a sip. When she noticed me, her smile wavered. "I didn't know," she managed to say, before I could even sit down. Regarding the death certificate and the will, I was told it was simply a standard document. I went ahead and signed wherever my father directed me. Throughout the process, I stayed silent. I placed my phone on the tabletop, its screen unlit, but still capturing audio. "I promise you, Vera, none of this was my intention. I had no idea their actions would go so far." Her voice faltered as she spoke. "I honestly believed we were only trying to protect what belonged to our family." "What did you mean by what was mine?" I asked again. She recoiled slightly at my question. I had never imagined I would push back. I always used to just walk away. That much was accurate. But I was no longer the woman who simply left things behind. I murmured an apology, explaining that fear was my reason. I was convinced that refusing to cooperate would get me excluded as well. I watched her brush away a tear with the cuff of her expensive jacket. I didn't doubt that she felt remorse. It just didn't matter to me whether she did or not. There were no threats, no fury, only quiet. I rose, slipped the phone into my pocket, and left without looking back. Her words still echoed in my mind as I crossed half the cafe, but I kept going. Beyond the doors, the air carried the distant promise of rain. I tightened my coat around myself and moved forward, not toward what had happened or revenge, just onward. In my email, the last file from Grandpa Luther Callahan waited. Transfer of deed, effective immediately after confirmation, highlighted in bold. The steps of the Municipal Justice Center felt less bustling than I'd anticipated. No reporters, no dramatic scenes, just the steady rhythm of my boots on the weathered concrete as I made my way down. The deed rested in my grip, my name printed in clear, bold type beneath the official county seal beside the estate. No more uncertainty, no more make-believe. I hesitated before the final stone step, turning around to face the place where I had struggled for so long to finally have my voice acknowledged. I stood with the deed held up in front of me and snapped a single picture, my face expressionless and calm. The caption I typed was unmistakably direct. Ignoring the urge to celebrate, I simply powered off my phone and slipped it into my bag. There was no urge for a triumphant gesture or public display. I felt no need for either. In silence, I made my way 5 blocks to the modest brick studio I'd purchased the week before. It was a humble spot with lofty windows and worn wooden floors, nestled between a flower shop and an old forgotten laundromat. Even though it was still bare, the place belonged to me. I turned the key in the lock, entered, and retrieved the envelope my grandfather had left for me in the vault, the one labeled "Start Here." 3 items lay inside. There was a roughly drawn rendering of the studio's floor plan, a business license form halfway filled out in his handwriting, and a note with 4 words carefully underlined: "Make something they can't wipe away." Perched cross-legged atop the gritty floorboards, I let the significance of all I had surrendered and regained settle over me, the way dust drifts down after a storm has passed. This wasn't about vengeance. Retribution had nothing to do with it.